So a recent headline that was interesting to me is the state of Oregon passed a law that has statewide rent controls. So I wanted to hear from Brian, kind of what are your views on rent control and other affordable housing regulations?
And if you say it's coming to Florida, I will headlock you right here in this state. I will headlock you right here. It only lasts about 5 seconds if you take me, but.
Well, I think it really comes down to a question of how it's done. I mean, if you look at how the legislation was written in New York and how the market responded, the market did not respond and take the legislation well. If you look at how the legislation was written in Oregon and how it was written in California, the market viewed it more as an anti-gouging piece of legislation.
Will you explain real quick what
Yeah.
rent control is?
So I mean, what they're saying is that there's a cap on how far rent can grow, and in both California and Oregon, there's a base piece that's at the discretion of the owner, and then there is a piece of that's associated with inflation. So you've got maybe 3 or 4% that the owner can raise it, and then they can raise it some more if inflation goes up. But the cap is basically 8 to 9% total. And so I think the market has viewed that in those areas as anti-gouging. In New York, it's a total different ballgame in that there were clauses that were included that if someone moved out, you could not move the unit to market. And so I think that the market perceived that as very draconian. There also are measures, and I'm not aware of them closely, but certainly there are caps on how fast and how far the rent can go up.
So Betsy, what's your view on like affordability regulations and rent control and that sort of thing?
So I have an economics background, and so anything that artificially puts controls on a market, I'm usually not in favor of. I think the studies that I have seen, when you try to do that, short term it does solve problems, but I think long term investors do end up leaving that asset class when there are going to be controls. There's less incentive for properties to be maintained. And the studies that I've seen with rent controls in particular, over the long period of time, the vacancy rates in those projects tend to be higher than if it had just been a natural market. So I don't know what the solution is, but I'm generally not in favor of anything that artificially puts a ceiling or a ceiling or a floor on prices.
I mean,
I think you're spot on. The other thing is they just leave the market. So like New York and California, that's a ton of my calls. That's a ton of my business. I'd have to look at my stats, but probably 15 or 20% of my sales of the last couple of years have been from those two states.
I mean, I'd like to weigh in. Stephen and I were talking about this beforehand. I mean, you'll get mad at me for saying this because I'm going to say that multifamily is not the hottest sector. Where I think is the hottest sector is actually manufactured housing. We have priced people out of A to B, B to C, and then beyond Class C. And so I think that are seeing those folks, and you talk about rent control. Rent control does not impact manufactured housing, and so you'll begin to see more folks and more developments begin to rise up and be developed in those areas, assuming that the communities will allow them. But I think that's where we'll see that dynamic coming forth.
And Stephen, we were talking about this. Tell them about manufactured housing that today, and it's not what you think it is.
Okay, it really isn't. First of all, many years ago, I did live in a mobile home. A strong wind, you went down the street to the bunker because you were afraid the house was going to blow over. That's not the case anymore. These are well-manufactured houses. They are, put into the ground. They're, so I've heard a couple of commercials where they're now guaranteeing that in a storm, you can ride out the storm in these homes. They're not going to blow away. They're well insulated. They're priced very well for what you get, as compared to a stick-built house. Your costs, land costs are going to be the same, stuff like that. But the manufactured house, the other advantage to that is that within a short period of time, you go to the manufacturer, tell them what you want. A couple months, you have a house, They come in, they assemble it, you move in. So from that point, it's an affordability aspect of it. A lot of people that are going to move in, they're going to be at both ends of the spectrum. You're going to have your older persons that are downsizing, and then you're going to have your first-time home buyers. Right now in our economy, we have a lot of persons that have delayed moving into their first homes. They've stayed at home because of costs, because of the inability to afford housing. Well, now they're getting of age to where they're having families. They really don't want to live home with mommy and daddy and have kids too. So now they're going to be looking at their first homes. That is an excellent first step, okay? And like anything else, you take that first step, you build equity, then you can move on, until you get your forever house, as they say.